Well, welcome everyone to this leadership conversation as we reflect on what it means to lead in this pretty extraordinary season that we find ourselves in at this time. And today, special welcome to Ross Clifford and John Hickey and Ross Lowe. Ross Clifford, of course, you know, serves as principal of Morling College. John as CEO of Baptist World Aid Australia and Ross Lowe as CEO of Baptist Care New South Wales and ACT. So thanks for your time, guys, as we, I guess, reflect on this season and what we can be learning, particularly in terms of how we might lead in ways that are adaptive and lead our organisations and churches and people in ways that are healthy and helpful at this pretty amazing time. I guess one of the particular opportunities and also challenges of this season is that things are changing so rapidly, and it's a season in which leadership is really important, but it needs to be leadership that's able to adapt and able to lead in ways that people can sense that clear sense of being able to make the changes needed, sometimes very quickly in an environment that's changing rapidly to be productive in the new environment. And let me say that I've seen this, of course, in our churches as well, and we're hearing great stories how churches across our state and territory are adapting at this time. I think of Molong Baptist, that when they found out that churches could no longer gather, but they could open for essential services and supplying essential services to the community, decided to open a food pantry and have been doing that now for a number of weeks or almost a month or two, and have had opportunities for ministry that they wouldn't not have had in any other way. And that was because they took stock of what the situation was and sort of how can God lead us to adapt the way we're doing ministry and leadership in this new environment. So as we continue to live in an environment that is quite fast-paced in the way it's changing, even now, and we know that the normal that we're working towards will be a new normal, and it won't be the same normal as before. This practice of adaptive leadership, of being able to move and shape with the circumstances, but while retaining our clear focus and our God-given mandate, what we're here to do. That'll continue to be key. So I thought it might be great to just hear from some of us on the call today, how you're living that out in your environment. So John, I might go to you first, if that's all right. I know that, of course, COVID is not just an Australian issue. Of course, it's a global issue. And so I imagine that'll have pretty significant implications for Baptist World Aid Australia and how you operate in that environment. What's that meant for you personally, perhaps, and also your organisation in this season?
Thanks, Steve. Well, when something of this nature happens, you know, we don't have a reference. It's the largest humanitarian, social, and economic crisis since World War II, and so we had to stop and think very quickly, what does this mean? And not only pivoting our whole organisation to face what the new realities are, you know, the practicalities of working remotely and so on, but really the big question was, how can we be both prophetic and empathetic? So normally when we think about vulnerable people around the world, they're remote from us. Their vulnerability is something that we have to talk prophetically into and hope that people get the message and engage with the issue. This time, everybody in the world feels vulnerable and going through all sorts of crises from, you know, will I catch this disease, through to church leaders wondering whether their churches would survive, you know, supporters, particularly our elderly supporters, feeling very vulnerable. But we had to be prophetic at the same time, because we knew no matter how bad things got here in Australia, in different parts of the world where we've been working for so long, it was going to be far worse. Without the health facilities, without the ability to socially distance, one of the big issues that was emerging very quickly was that people would starve before they got the disease in a lot of places, because they couldn't go out and earn money and feed themselves and their family. So how to actually set ourselves up internally, but at the same time face both our partners and vulnerable people around the world, and face our constituency in Australia, and understand the struggle everybody's going through locally here, get alongside them, but at the same time start telling the stories about what's playing out internationally, and then sorry, something went off there, and what's playing out internationally, and getting people alongside there. So we've actually seen that happen quite quickly, that we have a lot of churches and leaders and supporters engaging with the issues now, which is a huge positive change. I could talk more about a number of the other things we did, but that's been the big one. We had to change our whole DNA of how we focused our organisation to be both prophetic and empathetic at the same time.
That's great. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. Ross, let me go to you for a moment in the story of Morling. I mean, end of last year, beginning of this year, new building there, students start coming in for the first time. Morling's had a long history of a strong online presence, but of course, very committed to relational, face-to-face. And then within a few weeks of a new building being available, you can't use it. So, I mean, it's been very significant for the Morling story. How has it played out for you in terms of needing to adapt?
Oh, Steve, adapt is number one in a real sense. And I think for Morling, for myself, these times, it's important that you listen and you look. It's easy to think, I'm going to adapt, and then you set out what the adapting agenda is, rather than asking, what are people, your clients, I mean, what are your students, what are your parishioners really asking for in this particular time? Because their life cycle and their situation might not be ours. So in that listening, apart from the obvious live streaming, which was absolutely essential, and we did fairly quickly, and I think did as well as anyone, there was this call for shorter courses that I don't know what my season's going to look like. I might have a window here that I can do something. So quickly, we joined the momentum to get a semester course fully approved at an undergraduate level for fee help and the like, that someone could say, whether recognised pastor or youth leader, hey, I could do 3 or 4 subjects now because my life is a little bit different, and walk away with an accredited qualification that equips me and is good for my standing in my church and my ministry. So I think that listening was really important for us, to hear what people were saying, what they could cope with and what would really, be good for them. And I think the other one is looking for opportunities. And for us, it's really stronger together. And I see that in our whole Baptist system. And so, as you'll be aware, Steve, we started conversations with both our Baptist College in Perth, WA, as to whether we might become one, stronger together. But when this whole coronavirus just took control, it became obvious that we're doing things that we're replicating, and things that we could do together from online and registration and whatever, and therefore release our resources into bigger dreams and bigger aspirations. So stronger together. And I think the whole sense of hearing that people wanted shorter courses, that they wanted us to serve them in this window they had as they sought to adapt to the coronavirus.
No, that's great. And that whole issue of two-way communication, I'm hearing, is really important as we're hearing from people and we're being able to speak back. Yeah. Yep. John, if I just go back to you for a sec, that communication thing must be really challenging over the miles as well, and you've had to make massive adaptations in terms of arrangements with partner organisations overseas, and what's been your sort of reflections and learnings in that?
Well, in such an emergency as this, we had to be very quick and decisive. I think if you spend lots and lots of time prevaricating around things, it only makes it worse. Had to be very clear. So we immediately actually suspended all our normal program payments to our partners. But we did so in a way to say, look, we're here to support you, but the normal is no longer the normal. What we need to do is understand, what do you need to survive, first of all, and then what can you do in the communities that you serve that is about helping to prevent the outbreak of disease, and then later do relief work. So we've actually did that in the space of about 2 to 3 weeks, and our partners really got on board with that very quickly. We've got about 50 partners around the world we're working with. Amazing. And since then, we've run webinars. So every week we do a webinar. We had 84 people on a webinar late last week, just around key issues to help them in thinking about how they do this practice in difficult times. So just our international programs team has just been very decisive, very clear. Our partners have appreciated it. They have financial stability because we're saying we're supporting them, and they're starting to think about what they can do constructively. So,
yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. So timeliness, sense of clarity, and also the communication mode you talked about then. I mean, I reflect even on our journey in the association of establishing those sort of webinars, those Q&As, sessions with pastors and leaders, which have been really well received. And I think something we've learnt too there is at the end of each of those sessions, having that feedback loop, like you were saying too, Ross, in terms of, is this working for you? What do we need to be doing so we can continue to serve you clearly in these times?
Yeah, and in this case, we're asking the partners, what do you want to know? What can we help you with information? And it's not just us disseminating information. We're getting some of our partners sharing what they know, and really making it like a circle of excellence, talking, sharing with each other.
That's good. Now, coming back to your comment around timeliness too, Ross Lowe, can I bring you in here? Because there were some pretty significant timeliness issues that you had to deal with amongst a whole lot of other stuff. What's this journey been like for you in terms of adapting to COVID?
Yes, indeed, Steve. I think John's words were very apt in a sense of time is of the essence when you have a crisis as we did at Dorothy Henderson Lodge. I guess the 3rd of March will always be indelibly etched in my mind when we had a phone call from the Department of Health in Canberra and the New South Wales Health Department to be in the boardroom at 8:30 p.m. on Tuesday night to work through the recording of the first staff member to be a community recorded positive COVID-19 recipient. And from that time forward, we set up a crisis team that was meeting, in fact, every morning at 9 o'clock and every afternoon at 4 o'clock for the next 65 days through till we had clearance from New South Wales Health. And I guess the thing that I would bring as a learning from that is about conducting of meetings. I think, as John said, you don't need to prevaricate. You need people in that meeting that can hear and listen to understand, not necessarily always listen to respond. They may not have all the information. There were times when we didn't have all the information and we needed to make quick decisions. And we took those decisions. And I'd say that we got about 80 to 90% of those decisions correct. Then you need to say, what do you do with the 10 or 15? And so we looked at the facts, we changed, and we moved forward in a slightly different direction. There was no egos there saying, oh, yeah, but I'm trying to understand why we didn't do this or why we didn't do that. We just made a mistake, we changed, and we're moving forward. And I think that's really the critical thing when you're running crisis. It is about moving forward. And as I said, we were having these meetings twice a day, every day, so that's 7 days a week, right through until the 7th of May, when, as I said, New South Wales Health gave us clearance. And through that time, I guess the underlying thing was that we were continuing to pray for God's guidance and wisdom. And there's no doubt that he was with us as we went through that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, you talked about those meetings that you're having regularly, Ross. That whole communication piece in times of crisis and needing to adapt is so critical, isn't it?
Yes, I think if I look back, to be honest, that is probably the learning curve of communication. I think our Marcoms people use the term communicate, communicate and communicate. And when you're thinking about what you should do next, communicate. I think then you still potentially get into trouble for not communicating enough. But I think we did, and we're getting so much feedback now from the residents, the staff and the residents' families that they were looked and handled very well during that time and kept completely abreast of what was going on.
Yeah. Something else I noticed, Ross, in the response of Baptist Care was that you had people that were working outside of their normal work
Yes.
duties, didn't you, in all sorts of ways? And so it was really, people had to adapt quite significantly, even in their own personal work situations.
Yes, indeed. We had our senior chaplain. She was serving, as was one of the chaplaincy managers, on a day-by-day basis. I think she was there for about 23 days straight without a break. And we had others that had come in from varying areas. Some of them were in our home service area, and they responded to a plea that I put out about a week into the crisis, because at that stage we'd been told that all our staff had to self-isolate. And this was before the government had their surge workforce, and therefore as a consequence we had to find staff to fill the shifts. And I did a plea over the Zoom, the same as we're doing now, and we had people come from everywhere, and it was just lovely to see the response that we had to people meeting the need at Dorothy Henderson Lodge.
That's great. Yeah. And you mentioned, of course, the significance of prayer there too. I guess for all of us, this is a season where reliance of God on God is. I mean, it's always critical, isn't it? But it's forced into our consciousness again in a very, very clear way that we are here and we're doing what we're doing because of His enabling and His strength in all of that.
Yes, and the number one priority, obviously, was the residents. And I think, as a consequence, they were certainly looked after well through that time, both by all the people involved, and I've said in various places, the help that we had from the Department of Health in Canberra, New South Wales Health, and the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission was just wonderful at the time.
That's great. Yeah. Well, I think for all of us, it's fair to say this hasn't been the year we've anticipated, and I'm sure that's true for all of you who are watching as well. And of course, the leadership challenge in all of this is, among other things, to discern what God is saying to us and how He's asking us to lead our churches and our organisations to adapt to the environment as we find ourselves in, and to continue in the midst of that to advance the gospel together, and not only to make those changes that are necessary, but as you pointed out, Ross, in terms of the Morley experience, to take those opportunities that might not have necessarily been there before, but now are there, to take those opportunities for the kingdom. So I trust these thoughts have been helpful for you, and know that we continue to pray for you in your church and your organisation as we navigate this season together.